In the jungles of Vietnam, a group of American soldiers walked in silence. Sweat dripped down their faces, their uniforms were soaked, and each step seemed to sink into hot mud. They spoke softly, alert to every movement. Suddenly, a shot rang out. A single shot. A man fell before he even understood what had happened. There were no cries of warning. There was no second shot. Only the sound of accelerated breathing and the certainty that someone, somewhere invisible, was watching their every move. That someone was Carlos Hathcock. He wasn't there by chance. He didn't move on impulse. While those men advanced, he had already been lying there for hours, perhaps days, hidden among leaves, mud, and insects. His face painted, his body motionless, his eyes fixed on the telescope. He didn't blink more than necessary. He didn't breathe uncontrollably. He waited. He always waited, but this story doesn't begin with that gunshot. It begins years earlier, far from the suffocating jungle of Vietnam. It begins with a skinny boy from the countryside who spent more time observing than speaking. While other children chased after balls or fought in the street, he stood still, attentive to the details. He enjoyed hunting with his father, but not for the hunt itself. He enjoyed the process, the patience, the need to remain still until the right moment arose. He grew up understanding something that few understand. Whoever controls their breathing controls their body, and whoever controls their body controls the moment. When he joined the Marines, he wasn't the strongest or the loudest, but he was the most stable. In shooting competitions, he displayed a disconcerting calm. While others trembled under pressure, he seemed comfortable. It was as if the world slowed down when he looked through the scope. It wasn't explosive talent. It was discipline repeated thousands of times. Then came Vietnam. The war he encountered had no clear borders. There were no well-defined lines on the map. The enemy wore no distinctive uniform. The jungle swallowed sounds, concealed movements, and transformed every shadow into a threat. There, survival depended on seeing before being seen, and it was in this setting that he became what would make him famous. Unlike soldiers who advanced in groups, he operated alone or with an observer. He crawled for hours, sometimes for days. He ate little, he drank the bare minimum. He couldn't move when mosquitoes landed on his face. He couldn't react when ants crawled up his neck. One wrong move meant revealing his position, and revealing his position meant death. Soon, the reports began. North Vietnamese officers were being eliminated with surgical precision. Always a single shot. Always without leaving a trace. The rumor spread among the enemy. There was an American sniper who seemed invisible, and when a man begins to seem invisible, he ceases to be just a soldier. He becomes a target. The reward for his death was announced. Now it wasn't just him hunting. It was him being hunted, and this is where the story starts to get interesting, because it's one thing to eliminate an enemy you can barely see. It's quite another to know that someone equally trained is trying to do the same to you. Somewhere in that jungle, there was another man lying motionless, waiting for the exact moment to pull the trigger on him. The question was no longer whether he would make the next shot. The question was, who would make a mistake first? And the mission that was about to take place would put that question to the test in a way that no training could have predicted. The mission arrived without dramatic announcement. Just one direct piece of information. A North Vietnamese general was coordinating operations that were costing American lives. If that man remained alive, more platoons would return home incomplete. The order was clear. Stop it. For many, it would be just another operation. For Carlos Hathcock, it would be an absolute test of everything he had learned. He wasn't dropped off by helicopter with extensive coverage. There was no spectacle. There was silence. He began to advance alone, crawling. Inch by inch. The sun burned. The vegetation cut his skin. Water was scarce. The radio was almost unusable. For 4 days, he advanced at practically the speed of a slow clock. Meanwhile, enemy soldiers walked just a few meters away, unaware that an American Marine was there, motionless, controlling his every breath. Think of something simple from everyday life. Imagine trying to stay completely still for 5 minutes in a closed room. without moving your arm, without adjusting your posture. Now imagine doing that for hours, with insects on your skin, with a real fear of dying if you scratch your face. It is at this level that the mind begins to fight against the body itself. Many would fail, not for lack of courage, but because human instinct demands movement. It overcame its own instinct. When he finally reached the ideal position, he observed the target for a long time. He didn't fire immediately. He confirmed patterns. He confirmed identity. He knew that this shot wasn't about statistics. It was about protecting comrades who would never know his name. When he pulled the trigger, it was a single shot. The general fell. Confusion filled the air. Hathcock was already walking away before they knew where the shot came from. But the jungle doesn't forget. The news spread quickly. On the other side, an experienced sniper was given the mission to find him. This man became known among Americans as Cobra. Unlike ordinary soldiers, Cobra thought like a hunter. He understood patterns, anticipated movements, studied reports. He didn't just want to kill an American. He wanted to eliminate the sniper who was affecting the command structure. The duel that ensued had no audience. There was no announcement. Two men lay in the vegetation, separated by distance and silence, trying to anticipate each other's thoughts. It wasn't physical strength. It was calculation. It was patience. At a certain point, Hathcock noticed something strange, a minimal reflection, an almost imperceptible glint, a detail that anyone else would ignore. He adjusted his aim slowly. There was no room for error. The subsequent shot went straight into the enemy rifle's sights. Cobra died before he even understood what had happened. Many called it luck, but luck doesn't explain hours of waiting, emotional control, and attention to details invisible to most. It was the result of discipline, training, and responsibility. He didn't celebrate. He simply confirmed that his men were safer that day. It's easy to imagine that a man like that feels no weight at all. But the truth is different. Soldiers who have served know that every decision is recorded. Hathcock said he didn't see his targets as numbers. He saw them as threats that needed to be neutralized to protect his team. That difference is important. It wasn't hatred. It was duty. And duty, for those who wear the uniform, is something that is non-negotiable. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a routine operation, the armored vehicle he was in struck a mine. The explosion was immediate. Fire engulfed the interior. Many would try to get out first. He didn't. Even burned, he went back inside to pull out his trapped comrades. One by one, the heat consumed the oxygen. His skin burned. His vision failed. But he continued. He only came out when he was sure there was no one else alive inside. The man who had spent days motionless in the jungle now lay in a hospital with severe burns that ended his operational career. For any veteran, this transition is brutal. One day you're an active part of the front line. The next, you're struggling to move your own body. Many get lost at that point. He didn't. He became an instructor. He passed on what he knew. He trained other snipers, teaching them that precision isn't just technique, it's character. His story isn't just about impossible shots. It's about responsibility under pressure. It's about protecting men who might never know who protected them. It's about discipline when no one is watching. And the question isn't how many targets he hit. The question is how many American lives came home because of decisions made in silence. But there's something even deeper that few realize. The war ends on the calendar. For many veterans, it continues in their memory. The next part of this story doesn't involve jungle, generals, or duels. It involves what happens when the outside noise ends and silence returns. Because the real challenge isn't surviving the battlefield. It's learning to live after it. When he returned home, the war wasn't over for Carlos Hathcock. It had merely changed form. The uniform was still there, the medals too, but his body no longer responded as before. The burns had left permanent scars. The pain was constant. Simple movements required effort. For a man who had mastered every muscle on the battlefield, being dependent on physical limitations was a silent blow. He could have withdrawn completely. He could have chosen an anonymous life, far from anything that reminded him of the jungle. But he did the opposite. He returned to the Marine Corps and helped structure the modern sniper training program. He transformed real experience into doctrine. Every lesson taught carried weight. He didn't just teach how to shoot. He taught mental discipline, emotional control, moral responsibility. And here an important question arises: what is worth more, a perfect shot or the training of dozens of men capable of protecting their comrades? Perhaps the greatest impact of his life was not in the jungle, but in the training rooms, where he transmitted values that would transcend generations of soldiers. During training, he insisted on something many didn't expect. He said that a sniper shouldn't feel pleasure in firing. A sniper should feel responsibility. He repeated that every bullet fired has consequences. There was no room for arrogance. There was no room for impulsiveness. This attitude wasn't weakness, it was combat maturity. Some young recruits wanted stories of glory. They wanted to hear about the duel against Cobra. He would tell them, but he always ended with a simple point. You're not here to become legends. You're here to make sure your men come home. That phrase shaped the mindset of many who served afterward, but his body continued to take its toll. Years after Vietnam, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a progressive, unpredictable disease. For a man who had faced mines, enemy snipers, and impossible missions, the battle was now internal. There was no visible target. There was no flanking strategy, only the need to adapt. How does a warrior deal with an enemy that cannot be seen through a scope? This is a different kind of war, a silent war, fought every day upon waking. Yet he did not adopt a victim mentality. He remained present at military gatherings, supporting veterans, maintaining the spirit of service. There's something many veterans understand deeply. Military identity doesn't disappear when the uniform is put away. It transforms. He was no longer the man lying in the jungle. He was the man who upheld values, and those values were simple: duty, honor, loyalty. Some critics have tried to reduce its history to the number of kills. This analysis is superficial. The true measure lies in the strategic and human impact. Each enemy leader neutralized reduced risk to American troops. Each instruction given to a new sniper increased the defensive capabilities of the units. The effect was not isolated, it was multiplied. But there's a point that few explore. He carried specific memories, not of the shots themselves, but of the moments leading up to them. The silence, the waiting, the weight of the decision. Many soldiers report that the moment before the action is the most intense. It is there that character is tested. Have you ever made a decision knowing there was no going back? Imagine doing that under the immediate risk of death, knowing that other lives depend on you. That's the true extent of the responsibility he was taking on. At the end of his life, he was recognized as one of the greatest snipers in American military history. However, public recognition was never the focus. He valued the respect of his comrades more. And that respect didn't come solely from technical skill, it came from conduct. There's a difference between being efficient and being honest. He sought to be both, and that combination is rare. When he passed away, he left behind something that goes beyond statistics. He left a standard, a model of a professional who understands that uncontrolled force is dangerous, but purposeful control is protection. And now the final question isn't about war. It's about legacy, what remains when the battlefield disappears. In his case, the doctrine remains, the example remains, and the idea remains that serving isn't about fame, it's about constant responsibility. Perhaps the greatest victory wasn't a shot through an enemy's sight. Perhaps it was proving that discipline and honor can survive war, burns, and disease. And that's a lesson that transcends generations, especially for those who wore the uniform and understand that the real fight begins long before the trigger is pulled and continues long after the last shot is fired. There's a little mentioned detail about Carlos Hathcock that completely changes how we understand his story. He wasn't just an exceptional marksman, he helped redefine the modern US sniper doctrine. Before Vietnam, the sniper role was still viewed with some suspicion within the armed forces. After the conflict, it became an essential strategic element, and this change is directly linked to men like him. During the war, estimates indicate that well-positioned snipers could significantly influence local operations, reducing enemy movements and disrupting chains of command. It wasn't just about eliminating a target, it was about creating a psychological impact. Reports indicate that North Vietnamese officers began to move more cautiously in areas where they knew there was a presence of American snipers. A single shot could alter routes, delay meetings, and force hasty decisions. This is strategic warfare in its most silent form. But there's an unexpected fact that many are unaware of. Despite having official records of dozens of confirmed eliminations, his colleagues believed the real number was higher. Even so, he never bothered to correct or inflate numbers. In an environment where statistics could become propaganda, he chose to remain discreet. This stance reinforces something important. His motivation wasn't tied to the count, but to the mission. After returning to the United States and helping to consolidate the Marine Corps' sniper training program, he began teaching something that seemed simple but was revolutionary. A sniper must be, above all, an observer. He trained men to notice small irregularities in the environment, an unusually broken branch, a minimal reflection of metal under the sun, a movement pattern that doesn't match the rest of the vegetation. He said that the difference between life and death could lie in a detail of just a few millimeters. And here's a point that connects this story to everyday life. How many times do we ignore important details because we're distracted? On the battlefield, distraction costs lives. In civilian life, it can cost opportunities, relationships, or strategic decisions. The training he developed wasn't just technical, it was mental. He taught absolute focus in a world full of noise. Another surprising fact is that modern US sniper training has incorporated a strong psychological component following experiences in Vietnam. It's not enough to hit targets at long range. It's necessary to endure isolation, extreme pressure, and moral responsibility. This understanding matured during and after that conflict. The practical experience of men like Hathcock was fundamental in structuring protocols that still influence current training. There is also a story that few know. At a certain point after the war, he participated in shooting competitions, even though he was already facing severe physical limitations. The progressive disease made simple movements difficult, but he insisted on maintaining a connection with what was part of his identity. Not to prove something to the public, but to prove to himself that he could still contribute. This persistence reveals that his strength was never just physical. And there's another little explored aspect: his influence on military culture. Many snipers trained under his guidance report that the main lesson learned wasn't about ballistics, but about character. He emphasized that the sniper is responsible for decisions that can change the course of an operation. There's no room for impulsiveness. There's no room for ego. This type of mentality created a standard that transcended his generation. During Vietnam, it is estimated that guerrilla warfare created an environment where territorial control was uncertain and dynamic. In this context, the presence of disciplined snipers acted as a stabilizing element for small units. They extended defensive range and reduced vulnerabilities. This helped protect patrols and forward bases at critical moments. But perhaps the most striking fact is this: despite living under extreme pressure, facing explosions, severe burns, and a debilitating illness, he never abandoned his commitment to the Marine Corps. He could have chosen bitterness. He could have walked away in silence. Instead, he chose to train others. What differentiates a man who faces war and continues serving from one who gives up? Perhaps it's the understanding that the mission doesn't end when the fighting ends. The mission transforms. For him, the mission became teaching. It became a legacy. It became a standard of excellence. Looking at the full story, we realize that his impact isn't just in Vietnam. It's in the fact that modern American sniper training programs carry principles developed from real combat experiences. It's in the respect veterans show when mentioning his name. It's in the doctrine that values discipline above spectacle. And there is something that remains silent yet powerful, the idea that even in chaotic scenarios, it is possible to act with control, responsibility, and loyalty. This combination is rare in any profession. In the military field, it is essential. When people talk about legacy, many think of monuments or books. In his case, the monument is invisible. It resides in the minds trained under his principles. It lies in the continuity of a tradition that places mission and protection above ego. The jungle is behind us, the gunfire is in the past, but the pattern he helped to establish remains active, and perhaps that is the true measure of impact, not what you do in a moment of war, but what remains after the world falls silent. There is a little-known moment in Carlos Hathcock's life that is perhaps more revealing than any shot in the jungle. It didn't happen in Vietnam. It didn't involve a telescopic sight or an ambush. It happened silently years later, when he could no longer run, could no longer crawl, could no longer support his own body as before. It was then that it became clear who he really was. Multiple sclerosis progressed unpredictably. Good days were followed by difficult ones. Simple movements required concentration. For a man who had trained absolute control of his body, this new reality was almost a cruel irony. But there is something that war teaches those who survive: adaptation. In Vietnam, adapting meant changing position before being seen. Now it meant adjusting one's life to limitations that could not be combated with military strategy. Even so, he remained present in military environments. He visited bases, talked to young Marines, and participated in events, not as a distant symbol, but as an accessible mentor. Many who met him report that he didn't speak grandiosely. He spoke simply. He asked about family, about plans, about purpose. There was a deep understanding there that service goes beyond the battlefield. There's something immersive about this image. A man who has faced mines and enemy snipers, now facing his own body, yet maintaining a firm posture. This creates a human layer that many narratives ignore. True strength is rarely in the moment of explosion. It lies in the constancy after the world stops applauding. Throughout his career, he received accolades and recognition. However, accounts indicate that what he valued most was the trust of the men around him. Trust isn't built solely on skill. It's built on consistent conduct. His teammates knew he wouldn't take unnecessary risks. They knew every decision was calculated to protect the team. That reputation doesn't fade with time. There is a powerful contrast here. The Vietnam War was marked by political uncertainty and internal divisions in the United States. Many veterans returned to a country that did not fully understand what they had experienced. In this scenario, maintaining pride in service required emotional maturity. He never renounced his uniform. He never renounced his commitment. Even in a complex environment, he upheld the idea that serving one's country is a value independent of political circumstances. Imagine the weight of that. You dedicate years of your life to a national mission. You face real danger. You lose friends. You return with physical scars, and yet you choose to maintain an honorable demeanor. That's not simple. It requires inner clarity. There is also a technical aspect that reinforces its historical importance. The Marine Corps sniper training program, structured with his direct participation, became a global benchmark. The selection standard, psychological focus, and emphasis on advanced observation consolidated a model that still influences current training. He didn't just participate in the war, he shaped the institution's operational future. In one of the best-known accounts, a former student stated that the greatest lesson he learned was not about how to shoot at long range, but about when not to shoot. This statement carries depth. In an environment where the power to eliminate is literally in one's hands, knowing how to restrain oneself is a sign of maturity. This mindset reduces errors and preserves lives. There is a final scene that many veterans remember with respect. Already physically weakened, he was formally recognized for his contribution. There was no exaggerated dramatization. There was sincere recognition. Here was a man who had lived through external and internal war, maintaining consistency between words and actions. When he passed away in 1999, he left behind more than just stories. He left an ethical standard. He left a benchmark of military professionalism. He left the reminder that discipline, emotional control, and responsibility are not temporary qualities. They are choices repeated throughout life. Looking at his entire career, we realize something important. Many men participated in the Vietnam War. Few transformed that experience into a structured legacy. He did. He transformed combat into doctrine. He transformed pain into teaching. He transformed physical limitations into an example of perseverance. The final image is not of a shot fired in the jungle. It is of an instructor imparting knowledge. It is of a veteran upholding values. It is of a man who understood that service is a continuous journey, not an isolated event. And perhaps that's the true depth of this story. We're not just talking about a skilled sniper. We're talking about a Marine who remained loyal to the mission throughout all phases of his life. From the battlefield to the classroom. From physical strength to the challenge of illness. This consistency is what transforms this story into an example. In the end, what remains is not just precise shots. Principles remain. Men trained under their guidance remain. The idea remains that responsibility and honor are not abstract concepts, but daily practices. And for those who wore the uniform, that is perhaps the strongest message of all. For years, when Carlos Hathcock was mentioned, the first image that came to mind was that of a man lying motionless in the jungle, his finger firmly on the trigger. The image of absolute precision, the image of the sniper who eliminated threats before they even realized the danger. But there is a contrast that changes everything. The greatest battle of his life was not fought against an enemy general. It wasn't against the sniper known as Cobra. It wasn't even against the fire that nearly killed him. The greatest battle was invisible, slow, and silent. The external war is over. The internal war is not. Imagine this scene. A man who once controlled every breath to avoid death now needs to relearn how to control his own body because of a progressive disease. A man who taught young Marines to overcome fear now lives daily with physical uncertainty. This contrast is brutal. And it is here that the story ceases to be merely military and becomes human. Many only see heroes in moments of explosion, in instants of courage under enemy fire. But what about when the enemy isn't wearing a uniform? What about when it manifests as constant pain, limitation, and loss of mobility? How do you react when there's no visible target, no tactical strategy, no position to flank? He could have chosen bitter silence. He could have isolated himself. He could have let frustration define his final years. But he did the opposite. He continued teaching, he continued advising, he continued participating, not with the physical strength of before, but with something more powerful, consistency of character. This is the turning point that few realize. The precision that made him legendary wasn't just in his aim, it was in the way he conducted his own life. He was precise in his decisions, precise in his posture, precise in his commitment to the values he swore to defend. And this brings us to a point that demands real reflection. How many times in civil life do we abandon principles in the face of the first difficulty? How many times do we justify small concessions because the situation has changed? He faced much greater changes and yet maintained consistency. We're not just talking about a Vietnam War sniper. We're talking about someone who turned adversity into a legacy. Someone who understood that service doesn't end when the fighting is over. Someone who understood that true discipline is applied when no one is watching. There is a detail that further amplifies this dimension. Many of the men who were trained under his guidance served in later conflicts. Each of them carried a fragment of the mindset he helped to shape. This means that the impact of his life transcended his own generation. It wasn't just about what he did. It was about what he taught others to do. And here comes the final question, perhaps the most uncomfortable of all. What is our legacy? It doesn't matter if you served in the armed forces or not. We all face battles, some external, others internal. The question is not whether there will be difficulty. The question is how we choose to respond to it. He responded with loyalty, with discipline, with a focus on protecting others before himself. There is anxiety in this reflection because it demands action. It's not enough to admire history. It's necessary to apply the principles: emotional control under pressure, responsibility in decisions, commitment to something greater than one's own ego. Perhaps you'll never have to crawl through the jungle for 4 days. Perhaps you'll never face a duel through a telescopic sight. But you will certainly face moments when you need to choose between the easy path and the right path. And it is in these moments that stories like this cease to be entertainment and become a point of reference. The culmination of this journey is not a perfect shot. It's consistency over decades. It's the ability to maintain honor when physical strength diminishes. It's the daily decision to remain true to one's own values. If this story resonated with you, don't stop here. Reflect on where you can apply more discipline, focus, and responsibility in your own life. If you've served, share your experience and what you learned in uniform in the comments. If you haven't served, tell us how you deal with pressure and responsibility in your daily life. Your story matters too. Subscribe to the channel to continue following real stories that show not only battles, but character under fire. Like this video so that more people can learn about stories like this, and leave your comment. Your experience can inspire others. Because in the end, the question isn't who Carlos Hathcock was. The question is, what kind of man or woman do you choose to be when nobody is watching?